good afternoon to you all, and welcome to Invest Africa's first event focused on the automotive trade sector. Today we'll be examining Africa's growing automotive industry, covering the growth opportunities and the strategies that investors, institutions and large-scale organizations can implement to see this affect the economic development across the continent. I'm really delighted that we're working closely with Afreximbank, our strategic partners at Invest Africa, and the Intra-African Trade Fair for today's session. We'll be looking at the investment interests in the sector and would like to promote these, and therefore I'd like to thank in particular AAAM and Afreximbank for joining us today. Before I hand over to Andrew Skipper, who's our chair for the session, we're going to show you a short video on the Intra-Africa Trade Fair, which is scheduled for the 8th to the 14th of December in Kigali, Rwanda, later this year. For any further information on the fair, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me or any of our team, and we will make sure that you're pushed and pointed in the right direction.
Thanks, Karen.
Join Africa's largest trade and investment fair in Rwanda. Intra-African Trade Fair gives you access to more than 1,100 exhibitors, 10,000 visitors and buyers, and more than 5,000 conference delegates from more than 55 countries. Participate in trade and investment deals worth $40 billion as business and government come together to explore business and networking opportunities at the International Exhibition, brought to you by the African Export-Import Bank and their premium partners, the IATF 2021, Transforming Africa.
Lovely, thanks. Firstly, thanks, Karen, and that all looks tremendously exciting. Let's fingers crossed that we might be able to make it there, vaccines permitting. As Karen says, I'm Andrew Skipper from Hogan Lovells, where I head up our Africa practice. I'm also co-chair of the UK government's Africa Investors Group, so I have particular interest in these trade issues. You've seen the flyer, and today should be absolutely fascinating because this is a really critical global industry, and we're looking at a population of over 1 billion in Africa, representing only 1% of global sales. 85% of the new cars sold in Africa and sold in South Africa, and 85% of cars sold in sub-Saharan Africa and used are second-hand. So we need to look at what this disparity means. So today we're going to look at the auto sector, where there are areas of growth, for the continent's economies, which particular economies we're going to be looking at, what strategies investors like ourselves and financial institutions can work together with governments and others like the DFIs, like multilaterals like Afrexim, and making use of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, the opportunity that brings, for example. The message I'm getting from my expert panel today, all of whom are fully embedded in the sector and have been for many years, is one of opportunity and potential realized as opposed to potential way down the road. But we have a long way to go. So let me introduce my panel first. So I'm going to start with Dave Coffey, who's the CEO of the Africa Association of Automotive Manufacturers, who I will henceforth refer to as AAAM. Dave spent most of his working life in the auto industry and is currently CEO of AAAM, having previously held senior positions with various automotive supplier companies, including Doorbell, Bell SX, and most recently, prior to AAAM, with Shatterproof in South Africa. I'd then like to turn to Yves Nono, who's regional president of the automotive aftermarket at Robert Bosch. Yves is currently regional president of that, and from in 2018 until 2020, he was Vice President of Mobility Solutions and has spent a number of years in Germany and elsewhere with Robert Bosch. Then Dhiren Vanmali, who's Executive Director, Government Affairs for the whole of Africa for Ford Motor Company in South Africa. Dhiren joined Ford Motor Company in 2001 and in 2016 was appointed as Executive Director of Government Affairs. And he sits on the board of directors for Ford Motor Company of South Africa. He leads on all governmental matters for the African continent and is therefore deeply involved in the investments which Ford have made both in South Africa and elsewhere. Finally, but not last, Gainmore Zanamwe, who's the Senior Manager of Trade Facilitation at Afreximbank, who we will all know as leading the charge, both in terms of being a multilateral in Africa, but also particularly focusing, I think, on freeing up trade, bringing scale to, and bringing for as much frictionless trade as possible following the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. Gainmore's been Senior Manager for Trade Facilitation since 2016, and prior to that, he was Regional Trade Advisor for the Commonwealth Secretariat Hub and Spokes Programme in Botswana and Fiji. So welcome to you all. I think I'd like to start with a question to everybody. In my brief overview, I spoke of the opportunities presented to the auto sector by the African continent. So I'd like to ask, is this the final frontier, as it were, in the world? And what are going to be the, and what do you see as the key areas for growth? Just give me an overview of where you see the auto sector in terms of where it's going to get to in Africa and where it stands at the moment. So Dave, I think if you could give us an overview of that, because you have a look across the whole piece here. So perhaps Dave start, please, and then move on to Dhiren, I think, perhaps. You're muted.
Andrew, thank you. I want to reflect on. Can you hear me now, Andrew?
Yes.
Andrew? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. I want to reflect on the significant progress that is currently being made in Africa in the auto development journey. If you look at what happened in Ghana, in Ghana in March 2020, the government approved the automotive policy. VW is assembling vehicles from August last year. You have Toyota and Nissan that are going to commence assembly around Q3 this year. And there's 3 other OEMs that have registered with the Ghanaian government as assemblers. So it's moving. In Kenya, we're expecting the announcement of the policy in the second quarter, and we expect implementation to commence in Q2. In March, we were contracted by the GIZ to develop an automotive policy, an ecosystem for the Ethiopian government, and that will be complete by the end of October this year. And in February, with Afreximbank, we met the Minister of Trade and Industry in Egypt, and we offered to support the fast tracking of their automotive program. And we have commenced preliminary work in Egypt. And in addition, in Ghana, the development of component manufacturing has commenced, where we hosted the first exploratory visit by component manufacturers in March to Ghana. And these were international component manufacturers that participated. We're anticipating, and we're going to plan 2 further visits this year. And we've also recently commenced engagements on the same topic on component manufacturing in Kenya and in Egypt. And then we applaud the African Union for launching the African Continental Free Trade Area on 1 January this year. Now, this will become the largest free trade bloc. But the Secretariat of the Free Trade Area has the unique opportunity of shaping a continental automotive strategy and policy with countries that are willing to participate. We know that the Secretariat is absolutely committed to driving the auto sector and industrializing across Africa. And we believe that the free trade area will provide the scale that will be spoken about today that is required for the auto sector in Africa to become globally competitive. So it's very exciting to see the support and interest for this journey from within and from outside of Africa. And it was wonderful that the VDA, which is the German Association of the Automotive Industry, partnered with us last year on a journey to develop the industry. And more recently, we signed an MOU with Afreximbank to collaborate on key initiatives that will drive the vision. So it's what's important is there's a lot more interest, there's a lot more belief in Africa to support us on this development journey. So we're extremely optimistic that we're getting momentum and we're making progress. Thanks, Andrew.
That's great. And Dhiren, maybe over to you now as one of the leading global manufacturers, obviously, who have invested significantly. And I know from my previous meetings with your organization that you, and we discussed yesterday, you don't believe in, you take the Adesina view of potential, that you can't eat potential and you want to get things done. So what are you getting done, and what do you see the opportunities in terms of the overall African market at the moment?
Yeah, I see African market to be rich in potential, rich in opportunities. We're starting to hear really strong positive sentiment and discussion of the African Union and key African markets. Strategically, Africa has a great runway to go towards automotive. The question is, how best can we see great opportunity? South Africa is a interesting benchmark. It shows what's potential, and Africa is substantially larger than a country. So the opportunity is quite substantial. As a collective, together with partnerships with government and the enablers like the African Free Trade Agreement, there's, in my view, really good opportunities to unlock scale, unlock the ability on infrastructure projects, unlock financing, unlock the supply base, because it's inherently important. With volume comes a robust and stable supply base. But all of this is critical to have a stable policy environment. And I think those key markets that are first to partner with automotive would be substantially significant in terms of expanding that footprint. So we are quite positive about where Africa is moving towards.
Yeah, and you've already demonstrated what can be done in South Africa and the wider impact, and we'll pick that up later. I think just as a comment, I think the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement is one which I've already heard more positive things said about on this call than on almost any other call I've ever been on in the last few months. So that's particularly around the scale point. So that's fantastic from my point of view. So Yves, from Robert Bosch, where do you see where do you see the opportunities? I mean, talking about, you know, the final frontier may be a banal statement, but it's a massive opportunity, surely. So where do you see it?
I think from our perspective, I would say from a component or supplier manufacturer perspective, we are fully in line with the vision which is shared today by the AAAM. We also are an active member on the AAAM with Dave Coffey. And we truly believe that in creating a certain amount of hubs in Africa, we can materialize on this huge potential. If you look at the demographic and development, the production, everything what is forecasted is unprecedented. We talk about 1.3 billion people right now on the continent. Yes, in the next decade, we're talking about doubling this amount of people. And as you know, mobility is the basic needs, same like it needs to eat. So we need to move to our friends, we need to move to go to work, we need to move to go to the hospital and all those. So, and automotive has a significant role to play as well. Automotive, in that sense, right now the continent is almost, I would say, if you want, virgin. If you look at the South, we have a well-established auto manufacturing supplier base in South Africa. And beside that, we talk about the North, and in between, almost nothing. So, right? So there's a huge potential. I don't know if it's the last frontier, but there's a huge opportunity. We look at that from all perspectives, not only from, I would say, about manufacturing car, but even from a maintenance perspective. It's already today some perspective which are there to be materialized. Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, we're talking about basic industrialization, and what the jobs that produces is what you're saying. And so this must be happiness embodied for Afreximbank, Gainmore, because this is what your president is pushing for. So where do you see that? I mean, we were talking earlier, you spending a lot of time now on the auto sector. Where do you see the opportunities in which you, as a multilateral bank and a facilitator of trade, can make the most impact? And how do you see this going forward?
Okay, thank you very much, Andrew. And it's actually a very interesting topic that is at the heart of what Afreximbank is doing. And as you probably may be aware, we were set up by member states and the private sector to facilitate intra-African trade and extra-African trade. And one of the major challenges that we've been actually seeing in the continent is the low level of intra-African trade at around 16–18%. So we believe that the automotive sector is one of the critical sectors that is very important in terms of driving intra-African trade. There are plenty opportunities to actually get a number of African countries to collaborate with each other, develop regional value chains in the automotive sector. And so we see a lot of opportunities to do that. And now, with the commencement of trade under the AfCFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which basically started trading on 1 January 2021, we believe that we now have a bigger market of more than 1.3 billion people, GDP of more than 2.5 trillion, which, by the way, if you look at it in the context of global GDP ranking, we actually rank number 8, just after India, and we overtake Italy. So this is the magnitude of the market opportunity that has been created. But as Dave rightly pointed out, and some of other colleagues alluded to that, we need to create a viable policy environment for the development of the automotive industry. The AfCFTA has started that, and we will be working with the AAAM, the AU, and the AfCFTA Secretariat to now develop a continental automotive strategy to ensure that these opportunities are fully realized. Thank you.
That's fantastic, and I think that I mean, but what I'm hearing is that, for example, policy is important, but scale is for the supply chains and getting things out. Scale is important. So, where do you think we're going to see the biggest increase in activity? Because it can't presumably be, not every country can have can have everything here. So, how do you see the activity of investment in post-COVID from now on into the auto sector? Where do you see the main investment going now? I mean, maybe start with Yves on that from the component side.
I mean, the main investment in my view is, if we talk about automotive industry, and I mean, Dave mentioned that, you mentioned that, Andrew, is all about scalability, because there is a certain infrastructure that need to be put in place in order to allow a sustainable development and industrialization of automotive. So if we talk about scale today, the scale, how can we reach that? We can reach that with the vision which has been put together with all our OEM and also the supplier with the AAAM, where we talk about the Pan-African Auto Pact. Where the Pan-African Auto Pact, if you look at the economical hubs in the continent, if you look, I will say you have about 5 out of those hubs which have the demographic size of the US or close by. This means they can afford a whole sub-ecosystem, I will say, in terms of automotive industry. But there are some, of course, elements that need to be put in place in order to enable those ecosystems to happen. And there we talk about the financing policy and infrastructure and support. We talk about OEM willing to localize. We talk about the supplier base to be installed instead. Now, on the supplier base, we have to keep in mind how that happens. Usually we talk about tier 1 up to tier 5. This means the people, the supplier base who is delivering today the car manufacturer. And that's not something which is happening overnight, because here we need that to have the policy in place to allow that. And this policy in place also need to leverage the potential. This means we have to look, for instance, of if we talk about West Africa, what should be the hub? What are the country, for instance, having raw material as a rubber? And if we talk about component, what are the components from a manufacturing point of view, from the supply chain, makes sense to be localized and based on the raw material. So in South Africa, we have South Africa being one of the biggest catalyst producer in the world, because the platinum is there, it's located there, and the raw material is there. So there need to be an exercise together with all the stakeholders, but also the government, to discuss about what makes sense be localized or to be manufactured in terms of components. And this needs to be clear, like you mentioned, Andrew. It's not about one country being able to do doing that. It's about the ecosystem, right? Where you have one country maybe doing everything related to steel, the next country related to rubber, or the one country focusing on motorcycle and the other one on truck or on passenger car. So, and from a Bosch perspective, very important is to understand that also between component, we have different kind of component. We have component which are highly to a certain level automated, or where the business case only makes sense if we talk about the size of 1 to 2 million car. And today, the whole continent, we are talking about 1.2 million car. So there's still a lot to happen, but we need to understand that this has to happen, I think, step by step. And this is linked to the skills transfer, to leverage the potential in the country, and to creating the policy around all that. And what's mean also trading, for instance, if you take even Ivory Coast producing raw material for other countries, there need to be a incentive friendly policy in place to allow this continent to trade with a neighbor country and to deliver them with those products. So I think it is really a big question to be answered. But I think that right now we have exactly with the AAAM and the Afreximbank and Ford and all other players. I think for me and from our perspective, it's the first time in the continent where we are approaching this topic in a very comprehensive way, where we have all the key stakeholders joining the table and shaping the discussion.
So that's I mean, and Dhiren, I mean, I think picking up the theme there, I think is one we talked briefly about, is that this doesn't happen overnight, and it requires significant investment from all parties to deliver you know, basic, as I said earlier, industrialization. So how do you see yourself or others replicating what's gone on in, say, South Africa, Morocco, places like that, where, you know, the north and the south, and what happens in the middle?
Yeah, I think to build on what Yves has mentioned, you know, this has been very difficult questions in terms of how do we perceive Africa? Where do you play such a large continent? And I think to the ecosystem that Yves has spoken about, and Bosch and Ford, we got to find strategic locations. I think we all align. Not every country in Africa is going to have a robust, complicated manufacturing footprint. You're going to need to create strategic locations in the West, in the East. It's very similar to what South Africa has done in South Africa. The only reason South Africa has received 16 billion rand in Ford investment was the receptiveness of a auto policy, a conducive policy that was usable by all OEMs and by supply base. That policy has evolved over 2 or 3 decades in development. The infrastructure, the supply base, the Bosch, the Bosches of the world have created an environment that was matured. And as a result, we created things like the Shwania Automotive Special Economic Zone, which is 12 suppliers, 10 pre-leases, you know, going to be generating its own, it's like a little city in itself. And in addition to this, we created a port project. And that's what Africa is going to need. It's going to be a evolutionary change. It has to be evolutionary. And the reason for evolutionary is not that it takes away from Africa. It allows Africa to progress in its own way, at its own pace, in a stable way, to ensure that automotive could grow and jump onto the next paradigm curve. Without the initial stability, without the foundations, without the pillars that make automotive successful in global markets, we would do a disservice to Africa if we have to jump the paradigm curve without getting the right pieces. And the right pieces is strong government policy. You can clearly see from Dave, from Yves, and from Gainmore, policy is critical. A good incentive environment and a legislative environment with the judicial system. We need the infrastructure to provide that support. And that's what we need. And you know, South Africa is not very far from Africa. South Africa is part of the African continent. And what we've achieved in South Africa, you could exponentially build on that in Africa. It does not have to follow the same path. It can be an accelerated path, but it can be built. You can build on it and you can grow from it into something substantially more. And just to add, you know, There will be 50 million people post 2030 that will be generating $10,000 household income a year, of which Sub-Sahara accounts for 43 million of that 50 million. Already there's a receptiveness and an income and a desire to grow. We could plug out this strategy and what we spoke about Africa to the first 50 million people. We have the base. The question is, do we have government's partnership legislatively to support this?
Thanks. And Dave, I mean, that's a good point to pick up. That's your job, isn't it, Dave, to get policy, the policy sorted out. Where are you seeing, because there's a massive opportunity here for countries, let alone for individuals, and presumably you will be telling those countries that, you know, the more they could, I mean, granted we have Africa, but the more the individual countries can align and support, the better. What sort of messages are you giving to countries, and to the extent you can, where are you seeing receptiveness? You mentioned Ghana to start with. I think that was the first country mentioned. So maybe, so what are you saying to government to say, well, this is what you need to do to make this work? Because this is a fantastic opportunity.
Sure. So it's clear that our role is to engage governments, African governments, on policies and ecosystems. So you take the government of Ghana. They are extremely progressive. We had the most wonderful engagement when we took the component manufacturers up there recently, where the minister said to them clearly that when you've developed your business case, you come and see us one-on-one, and we're going to support you with incentives to come and invest in Ghana. So there's three key drivers that I see, and some of them have been touched on. But the first is the political willingness. You've got to have the political will to actually drive and implement and introduce the sector, because there's some thorny issues in here, one being the second-hand vehicles that flood into sub-Saharan Africa, and which many of them are not roadworthy. Now, one has to deal with that and understand, and that's what we engage with, to say the economic benefit of introducing a fully integrated automotive sector is substantial. You look at the South African example of making 600,000 vehicles pre-COVID. That employed 900,000 people. 900,000, 7% GDP. You know, that's in the full value chain. So there's a very strong business case to do that. And then the other countries, so Ghana is clearly leading the pack with regards to willingness. Then the countries that I mentioned is Kenya, Ethiopia's commenced, Egypt. We see those as key countries coming through as being the hubs of assembly, which will then get supported by the regional economies. Now, we need to take the regional economies along in this, because it's important they get brought into the value chain so that they also support the demand. So political willingness is absolutely key. The second is developing the regional value chains, which we touched. But a third and very important aspect of this is providing affordable mobility. You know, it's absolutely key that we make vehicles more affordable. And our view on this is that we need affordable finance to be provided for new and used vehicles. We see used vehicles as being vehicles that were ultimately assembled on the continent and are at meet minimum standards that will be able to obtain affordable financing from credit institutions. It's critical that we take away the challenge from the political challenge of slowing down the imports of used vehicles by age, and that's how it takes place, and that by roadworthy. It's most important that vehicles are safe, but you bring in used vehicles into the equation, or vehicles that were assembled, and you provide an affordable alternative. And that is absolutely key, and those are the discussions that we have. And affordable mobility, it's a complex issue. We understand that, but we actually are working on it right now with all the industry players. So there are a few key aspects, you know, that we engage with government, and there are certain governments that are absolutely supportive. And we believe that with a few lighthouses coming out, so as countries already mentioning and showing success, you're going to see the momentum actually taking over.
Which, I mean, leads beautifully, of course, to Afrexim, both in terms of, because you as you said, the private and the public sector, and you have influence over governments, I would hope. So where do you see where do you see your role in pushing this? And then I'd like you to move straight into the question there of what exactly are you going to do to help finance? Because I think that, you know, the credit arms of the major motor manufacturers, I suspect, are not ready for this just yet. So Dhiren can comment on that or not as he sees fit later on, but I suspect the truth is they're not ready yet. So it means people like you, I guess, are having to do concrete things. So firstly, how are you helping to influence policy? And secondly, moving on to the question of, you know, there's no point in making cars if people can't buy them. How are you helping on that? So 2 questions really for you, I think, there. And then others can maybe follow up on the affordability side.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think these are very practical issues that are being raised by the industry experts. I think we have heard Dev's cry, and as Afreximbank, we are actually there to deal with some of the issues that Dev was actually speaking to. And what we've actually done is we've consulted extensively with industry players, with OEM, with AAM, through Dev. We have now identified the key challenges that are affecting the development of the automotive sector in the continent. And I agree with Dev because there are basically 3 key issues that we need to look at. There is the issue of the policy and capacity building. I think that is very important. We need to ensure that at the national level and at the regional and continental level, we have policy consistency. We have got the policies that will help us to put the right incentives, the relevant infrastructure in place to be able to support the development of the automotive industry. So at Afreximbank, we actually developed an automotive policy and strategy, which is actually based on 3 key pillars: policy, capacity building, regional value chains, and auto financing. I'll speak about auto financing at the end, but if I may probably touch on some of the aspects on the policy. We are now working with AAM and the AU and the AfCFTA Secretariat to build on the work that has been done by AAM to develop an auto pact, and then also take some of the elements that we've identified in our strategy to build a continental strategy that will then have to be endorsed by the heads of states to support the development of the automotive industry within the continent in a organized and collaborative fashion, so that all the key players, all the key countries will actually benefit. So we are already spearheading that work, and we hope that that will actually add momentum to the implementation of the CFTA. The second aspect that I want to touch on is the development of the regional value chains, which is very important because, as we have already seen, there are some hubs that are emerging. There's South Africa there in Southern Africa. We are looking at probably either Ghana, Nigeria in West Africa. There's Egypt and Morocco here in North Africa. We are looking at others in East Africa. Kenya has got potential. Rwanda is also doing something. So we need to use this hub and spoke approach to support those countries that are able to serve as hub. And these countries should then work with other neighboring countries who could actually be supplying some of the key raw materials or components. And I think my colleague from Bosch talked about the possibility of some countries either supplying rubber, and there's the possibility of some countries coming in with either steel, it could be platinum, it could be glass. So these are some of the things that we actually need to work on. So we are working with AAM to do a mapping of the value chain to see who actually can do what and how can we support that. We hope to actually finalize that work. Now to the most interesting bit, which is the auto financing. We already have a number of financing instruments to support the automotive industry. But based on the consultation that we have had with industry, we realize that more needs to be done in this area. So we will keep on providing our usual trade finance, which will support the auto. We've got project finance. We have got our fund for export development, which can inject some equity. We have got a number of initiatives that are supporting the development of automotive parks, because that is actually very critical. So in addition to these traditional instruments that we've been using to finance the automotive industry, we have realized that there are new auto-specific financing instruments that we need to actually develop, and we've been consulting with the industry. We are now working on how best to put in place affordable vehicle asset financing that Dave was alluding to, and we'll be looking at some of the things like auto finance supply chain. We'll be looking at distributor financing. We'll be looking at vehicles financing. We'll be looking at things like mobility financing, which is very critical. We are also interested in seeing how best we can partner with the OEMs, component suppliers, to actually work together to deal with some of the aspects on the demand side of financing, and how best to make the vehicles affordable. So these are some of the things that we are doing, and we hope that with the support of all the key players, we will be able to crack the Gordian knot. Thank you very much.
Thanks. That's this concept of partnership, and it takes me back to the sort of the African Union mantra of value in Africa for Africa. Now, for big multinationals coming into Africa and just building things and then taking out and not handing over know-how, for example, that's a challenge. So how do you see? So I'm looking at really at Ford and Bosch here. How do you see it as being? How do you create partnerships on the ground to obviously maintain your own value, but also mutually add value on the continent and grow the business there by, whether it's technology transfer, whether it's joint ventures or whatever. Dhiren, maybe from Ford, because this is Ford and Bosch, both of you do this all the time anyway, I know elsewhere. So Dhiren, maybe start with you and then Yves.
Well, we shouldn't look at these as mutually exclusive. The natural progression of having a Ford Motor Company or a Bosch or a supply base in the market, that automatically in itself, in the nature of the business, will encourage a recruitment process that meets a certain requirement, a desire to approach the local team, the desire to train and groom. And that comes in as the organization itself establishes a viable base in these markets. This is not something that will be done exclusively or as a grudge. We have to realize that businesses, let's just say the synergy, the most easiest option for business is to recruit locally, is to produce locally, to have the component structure close to the OEM, not to bring components from the East and from Northern Hemisphere. That natural progression is always linked to volume. It is not about let's bring it first and then get volume. It's about the business equation, because like many of our suppliers and Ford, we've got a business equation. And that business equation is paramount towards the longevity of the market. And a natural progression would be to recruit local, to go to the universities, to go to their workforce, to employ, to upskill them. What we've done in South Africa on a few occasions as we've expanded, we've sent 500 people over to different parts of the world to groom within the factory, to touch and see what sophisticated locations would look like. We brought that technology, we brought those individuals back. They are now fully within our organization. The same would happen within Africa. The same would happen within the supply base. That progression will be inevitably a natural. It does not need to be strong-armed. It does not need to be forced. It's the easiest way forward towards a successful industry. And for me, in my opinion, this is something that gets done in parallel and not in series. During this call, I do want to emphasize it is critical to have government as a partner, shoulder to shoulder, as we navigate this, because these are all the topics that we touch on. And this also flows into infrastructure. What are we doing on infrastructure? How do we create a sophisticated structure in markets that do not have a robust utility? It's not the make or break. It means let's work together to build. How do we get the proper road infrastructure? How do we get the right supply base? How do we get the right key suppliers around our proximity? And that's something very, very easily attainable as long as we have that handshake with the government on policy. I cannot emphasize how critical policy is. Policy touches all these facilities. Dave, through the AAAM, is inherently a key. I would say the AAAM paves the way forward for OEMs because it provides a synergy and a beacon in which we need to move towards. And the supply base is imperative. We've got to protect our supply base. There's no point we as OEMs setting up a base if we can't protect the supply base. The supply base is, in my opinion, as we expand Africa, is priority above every other value chain. The employment comes from the supply base. The stability of the supply of the sector comes from the supply base, and that's going to be critical in the way we progress the sector. So, and just one last point: the multiplier, for example, if you look at South Africa, it depends on each OEM, but some people use 8, some people use 12. The supply base is where the employment is, where the volume of employment takes place. For every one job we create, you get 8 to 12 jobs in the supply base. That's why it is imperative that we take a different approach with Africa, protect the supply base, protect the industry, and using policy, find a way to elevate the sector.
Thanks. That's great, and it picks up on the points which we were making about, got to get government on board, because if you haven't got the infrastructure, if you haven't got power, you can't do anything. So Dave, it's an easy job for you. You've got to sort out the whole of Africa's, sub-Saharan Africa's infrastructure and power problems in the meantime. You do everything else. But maybe whilst you're thinking about how you're going to do that, maybe Yves, you could respond to that, because I know in your space as well, the building up, whether you call it the multiplier effect or just straightforward capacity building and know-how transfer. How do you look at that in terms of the sub-Saharan or the African continent?
I think the view we do have as a supply is not much different as the view shared by Dhiren, right? If you refer to Dave's statement, 7% GDP to contribution, automotive sector in South Africa, those are numbers, right? Those are numbers. This is not only the OEM. Like elaborate, we talk about the entire supply chain, right, and the supply bases. The tier 1, the tier 2, the tier 4, the tier 5, and I mean, it is in the nature of things, because if you also want to, the next request will be on the competitiveness. If you want to be competitive, then you will need to localize. If you need to localize let's also be honest about that. It's about industrialization. It's about creating jobs, right? It's about giving perspective and bringing the continent to the next level. And this can only happen if, from a local, from in the strategy, we have an approach embedded which support the development of the local supplier base. And in the case of our company or Bosch or other supplier, I will pretend it's not different, because in order to produce, for instance, if we take an example of an engine control unit, right? The engine control unit is the end product. Yeah, and this is it's like a small computer. You will use that in the car to steer your car to make decision about the engine. But guess what? We will produce that. But where is the steel coming from? Where is the rubber coming from? Where is the lead coming from on the plate and all those? And if you have to bring that all overseas from India, from Europe and all those, how are we going to be competitive? So we need, for me, it is a key, it is a given that we need strong partnership. And then the question is how do we set up those partnerships? And this is where I truly believe that the AAAM approach is the right one, because it's a unique approach. It's the first time ever in the continent where we have, from my perspective, such strong, I would say, comprehensive approach, where it is about the essence, the skeleton. How do you design your policy? How do you build up your supplier base? How do you put this infrastructure around that? How do you make the mobility affordable, right, based on real data from the ground? And this is all what needs to happen. And I think the example of Ghana is quite good, because this is an example of how the scheme of your auto policy is going to be later what determine the sustainability of your automotive industry, right? So, and therefore, in this case, partnership is key. Partnership is key, and partnership means not only doing everything yourself. We talked about it before, not all countries will be on their own, partnership is key. They mentioned an initiative in Ghana with the support of the component manufacturer in South Africa, right? The NACAM, which is the supply organization, the component organization, is quite one of the powerful in the continent. I think that all other countries and other regions can benefit of this expertise which is already on the ground. And it's about having this discussion on what to do first and how to do it. And if we don't do it in a jointly, right, in well planned, we won't manage it. We won't manage it, because if tomorrow one country just decide, okay, I'm starting to do that, and I do it my own, it won't be sustainable, because you don't reach the scale what you need, and you need a certain deepness in the supply chain in order to be successful.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, sorry, that just goes straight to the policy and government point, because if you don't have stable policy, government with rule of law and all the things you need, then having rubber made in a different country where they suddenly aren't going to export it is a real challenge. So I think this is because at the moment, I mean, in a lot of sectors, it's cheaper to get stuff from the Far East than it is to get it from the next door country. So that's a challenge, presumably, which you're looking at. I mean, Gainmore, maybe, I mean, not only do we have, you know, governments will insist on localization policies, they will insist on their policy to make sure you use local, and that has to be something I think which Afrexim support. But doesn't there's a quid pro quo on that, which is that if governments insist on that, they have to facilitate the infrastructure and policies to make that work. And is that something which Afrexim will be pushing?
In fact, I mean, the number one is the political willingness, as emphasized by Dave, which is key. After that, guess what? Then we need to support the government, right? We, the OEMs and the supplier, know how to do it. The government, some of the time, don't know at all. So that's where we need now to come to join the table and discuss about them and share experience and also transfer skill. Right. If we talk about affordability today, Andrew, we talk about how much are our mobility users educated, because the people today which are buying a car, if we look at our research in West Africa or Nigeria or Ghana, the people which are buying a used car, usually they have 1/3 of the value on their hand to buy a car, and this is more than enough. I mean, for my 6 years in the US, 7 years in the US, this is even less. People afford car with 20% of the value in their pocket. What is it about? It's about the financing scheme to be in place to make those affordable car for them, if you want, tangible, to be approachable, right? And if it is completely missing, if you have an interest rate on the 2-digit level, close in certain countries to 20%, nobody's going to afford that. And the second thing is also about, it's not only about supporting, educating the government, it's also the mobility user. And in Africa, for instance, we talk a lot about used car. We talk about spare part which are non-genuine, and all those, and all that need to be addressed through the policies, right? And that's why the policy is key, right? In the education of the car user, we talk about total cost of ownership. It's not only about the value of the car, if you buy it as used or as new. The total cost of ownership consider the purchase amount of the car, is consider the fuel cost you have linked to the car, is consider the maintenance cost you have linked to the car, and the insurance, right? And if you look at the car holistically, you need to look at all that, right?
Yeah. No, and so I mean, Dave, over to you. Really, I think getting all that. Are you optimistic that you can achieve that working with Gainmore and the and governments? Are you seeing positive thing? I mean, maybe you and then maybe Gainmore pick that up. So where do you see? I mean, picking up all that stuff which Yves and Dhiren have said on the ground. Where are you coming out for the future? And what do you think what are realistic aspirations?
So we have a big aspiration. In 2035, we believe that there will be demand for 5 million vehicles, which is significant, but it can be done with the right policies and ecosystems. We spent a lot of time around that word policy because it's critical. And if you look at it, I just want to highlight, if you look at an ecosystem that we promote with policy and the governments we engage with are fully aware, it's not just about an incentive framework. It's about market expansion, standards, infrastructure, skills, supply. So it's the full scope, and even with institutional capacity building, because you've got to build the capacity in the government to actually manage the full system. So the structures are there to enable it. So it goes back to with the discussions we had regarding having the political willingness and actually driving it through. So I'm extremely optimistic about the future, and there are enough key member states out there that want to go on this journey, and that will drive it. Secondly, just a comment on component development. It's quite different in Ghana, and Yves touched on it, where it's very underdeveloped. You know, the component manufacturing sector, very seriously underdeveloped, whereas in South Africa and Morocco, a company can come put in a greenfield site because the demand exists. So you've got to find a hybrid model of substituting high volume imports, which also helps the government from a balance of payments perspective. So there are other ways to skinning this cat, and not only just you know, go for full manufacture there. You might do part manufacture with parts coming in. But lastly, with regards to local content and driving local content, the free trade area is going to have that, because there's going to be a rules of origin in a single market that we're heading for 40%, you know, of originating content from Africa. So there's a built-in mechanism to achieve this, you know, and to drive the regional value chains. So I'm optimistic, and for all the reasons I mentioned, and we have some great partners, and some of them are on this call, you know, in terms of driving it from an OEM component, support institutions. There's great drive to make it happen. So I believe it will happen.
That's fantastic. And I think Gainmore, can I just ask Gainmore to come in on that? I'm going to ask you and for the obvious Elon Musk question in a minute, so just be ready for that. You can tell me I'm a fool at that point. But Gainmore, maybe you could react to that, because I think, you know, what we're hearing is that multilaterals and their owners in the form of the countries are absolutely critical to this. How optimistic are you that this is something which can be delivered in, you know, whether in the context of Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement or not? Is this something, there's a hell of a lot to do here. There's a lot of infrastructure, there's a lot of policy, there's a lot of laws. Is that something which Afrexim firstly are committed to driving forward? And secondly, is it something you can see happening in the in whatever term you want to describe it as?
Thank you very much, Andrew. I think I start from the premise that it's time for Africa. I believe that I think we have been putting in place all the requisite policies. We've been working on infrastructure. The bank has basically put in place a number of initiatives to promote industrialization, to support intra-African trade, and also in the context of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, we are basically putting our money where our mouth is, and we were established to actually primarily focus on facilitating intra-African trade as well as promoting extra-African trade. So we believe that we need to do what it takes for the automotive industry to succeed. There is basically failure is not an option, and we actually need to do what it takes to ensure that the CFTA succeeds. From where we sit as Afreximbank, we believe that with partnerships like AAM, Ford, we've got Bosch and other people that we've been working with, I think this is basically where you now see industrial policy at play. And I believe industrial policy is basically a public-private sector dialogue whereby you agree on the requisite policies that needs to be put in place to support a particular sector like the automotive industry. I believe that with this partnership that we have, we will be able to develop a viable automotive industry within the continent. And I just want to add that one of the effective ways of also dealing with some of the issues that have been raised with regards to second-hand vehicles is to actually implement automotive standards. We have already started work on that, working with the African Standardization Organization as well as AAM. And the implementation of measures like homologation will also ensure that we deal with some of these issues and ensure that we develop, manufacture vehicles that are safe for the environment. We also limit the importation of some of these second-hand vehicles that are probably very old and not safe for our environment. We also need to do more on the financing. We've already started that discussion. We believe that once we drive the financing cost down, affordability will basically be addressed. We'll be able to actually increase the sale of more new vehicles. I believe even the target that Dave is talking about, 5 million in 2035, we can easily hit that if we work together. And lastly, I just wanted to assure everybody that we have heard the challenges around the policy issues. We are also going to organize a summit of selected heads of states during the Intra-African Trade Fair that we have had to discuss some of the policy issues to see how best we can effectively deal with some of those issues, of course, with input from industry. So I think this is the moment where I also invite you to the IATF in Rwanda from 8 to 14 December.
Perfect end. So we extraordinary optimism, and not just optimism, but guarantees of action from Afrexim and AAAM. I just wanted to ask the two brand manufacturers, and maybe we'll start with Yves because he wants to say something on it. But I want to say at least two questions have come through, and I wanted to ask the question. Everybody's talking COP26, COP27 in Africa, electric cars. Why can't we go straight to electric cars? And why can't that work? Yves, and then Dhiren, and then, conscious of the time, I'll welcome Karen back to say goodbye. But I understand why that not be possible, but lots of people are going to be asking, isn't this a great leap opportunity for Africa? So Yves, firstly respond to what you just heard, then answer that question. Then I want to leave Ford Motor Company as one of the oldest manufacturing companies in the world to finish off. So
thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Andrew. Before I get to your question exactly, I wanted to build up on what Gainmore just mentioned. I think if we talk about the vision of 5 million car in the next decade, is quite tangible, and we truly believe in that. However, in my view, we are talking about that one, and we are here. So we need to build a bridge. And for me, I go back to what Dave just said. Today, we need to have the demand. In South Africa, we have a demand for the supply base. In Morocco, we have a demand for the supply base. And my view is need to be acknowledged that with 50 million cars right now on the continent, there is a demand for component, right? There is a demand for spare part because every car needs a battery every 2 years in average, right? Every car needs a wiper system. We are in Africa, in certain countries, there are rainy season. Every car needs the braking system what needs to be renewed and all those. So, and I think that the demand can be created as the good prerequisite when we scale up in Ghana, in all the other countries, in Kenya, what we plan, because we need to have a bridge. How do you get to the 5 million, to the 1.2 million, to the 5 million? And I believe that those 50 million cars on the road can be huge to create the demand what you do. How do we do that? With homologation. How do we do that? With establishing some standards, right? In reducing the green import, reducing the fake part and all those. So, and I truly believe that in the field of aftermarket today, in the car maintenance and also diagnostic, the skills transfer what we need. Because what's the point of having those cars and nobody can maintain them? Because all our mechanics, 80% are roadside mechanics. So we need to transfer.
And so 30 seconds, if not less, on electrics, and then I want to give the last word to Dhiren.
Yes, electrification. I believe that Africa has shown in the past with its ability of leapfrogging, and we won't avoid electrification of the continent. In the motorbike Rwanda, we have also people which are already leading the way in terms of trying to electrify the entire motorbicycle fleet. So the topic of electrification, I think it will happen, but it will happen selectively. It is about first having the right prerequisite. Energy, affordable energy is the topic. How do you get it, this green energy? infrastructure is a topic. Another topic is policymaker, right? And if you are able to adopt right policy on time, then this will happen. I don't think it's going to happen on all the continent. I think that will happen selectively in certain parts.
So it won't be in time for COP27, but it will be at some point. Dhiren, final word to you, and then hand back to Karen. And thank you to everybody for a fascinating co-discussion.
Yeah, I just want to quickly touch upon the topic before I get to the EVs. The 40% African Continent Free Trade Agreement, the rules of origin, it's imperative. And the reason it is imperative is that we need to get as a continent to duty-free strategies to move people, equipment, products freely across borders. We need to do this in the now. I'm going to take a more pragmatic approach in my response, that we need to create a growing middle class. Income for sustainability is far more important than income for necessity. We can't have people still looking at scale on how we can put food on the table. The middle class progression is critical towards establishing a sound industrialization for the automotive sector. And that's what I really want to emphasize. If we want to move from 18% to beyond 18% of GDP in Africa, intra-Africa trade with duty-free with the 40% rule of origin has to be done sooner than later. Regarding EVs, I'm going to take a pragmatic approach. I do not believe we will see EVs anytime soon. I think critically we need to get the right policy. We need to get automotive sector stabilized. We need to provide the supply base, the infrastructure to be able to build and to grow. We need to have an evolutionary change in the auto sector. We need to develop the right skills. You're going to have pockets of EVs, but I'm talking about this as a scale product. You're going to have some individuals that can afford an EV because they have the disposable income, but majority of people in the continent may not have this at this point in time. I think we'll see this later. I think it's critical, and I think Africa does not need to rush the EV agenda. I think Africa needs to, we have still enough of time, a few more years to sort out the AfCFTA, cement this, get the policy right. Let's build on the base to protect our supply base, get the right legislative environment. Let's get a auto sector moving in key strategic markets in West and East Africa and North Africa, and then progress and maybe consider the paradigm shift subsequent to that. But without the base, jumping a paradigm shift of no base, to me, is just not practical. That's my position on EV.
Okay, well, I think the message from this is let's get it done. So thank you all. This is a great sector to be watching, I think. So let's look at it, and anybody listening, lots of investors out there, I'm sure, so keep an eye on this one. We're looking forward to your conference, Gainmore.